Michael Roberts was the kind of man people noticed the moment he walked into a room. He was tall, confident, and carried the charm of someone who had been successful all his life. At only 35, he had already become the CEO of a fast-growing aviation company in New York. The employees admired him, investors trusted him, and magazines wrote about his achievements. To many, he was a symbol of ambition fulfilled. On the other side of that same world worked Robert Miller. He was the janitor of the company building. His uniform was always simple, his shoes often worn out from hours of walking across marble floors, and his hands were rough from cleaning tools and heavy work. He moved quietly through the corridors, polishing glass doors, fixing broken lights, and collecting trash that others left behind. To most people, he was invisible, someone who blended into the background without importance. Yet Robert never complained. He carried his work with dignity, never showing bitterness even when people ignored him. Still, he had a certain look in his eyes, one that spoke of untold stories, a life far beyond the mop and broom he carried every day. Few ever cared enough to notice. That evening, the company held a special event on the rooftop. The sky above New York was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun began to set. A helicopter, brand new and shining like black glass, rested on the helipad. It was the highlight of the evening, brought in to impress investors and partners. Guests in suits and elegant dresses mingled with drinks in hand, their voices blending into laughter and conversations. Michael, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, stood at the center of attention. His confident smile and bold words kept the crowd entertained. Beside him stood Jennifer Collins, the head of marketing. She was smart, stylish, and often admired as the perfect partner to Michael's success. Her laughter rang out as Michael spoke, and her admiration was clear to everyone around. While the guests admired the helicopter from a safe distance, Robert worked silently at the edge of the rooftop. He picked up empty glasses, carried trays, and ensured everything looked neat. Most people barely gave him a glance, yet his eyes lingered on the helicopter more than once. He didn't stare like the others did with simple curiosity or admiration. Instead, his gaze held a deep familiarity, as if the machine was not new to him but something he understood. It was Jennifer who first noticed his look. She tilted her head slightly, watching the janitor pause near the helicopter, his eyes steady and thoughtful. Before she could think much of it, Michael's voice rang out, loud and sharp. "Hey, Robert," Michael called, his tone playful but edged with arrogance. "You like the helicopter? Think you could fly it? Or do you only know how to mop floors?" The guests burst into laughter, some louder than others. A few glanced uncomfortably at Robert, as if waiting for him to shrink back in embarrassment. But Robert did not flinch. He set down the glass he was holding and straightened his shoulders. His voice, though quiet, carried across the rooftop with surprising calmness. "A machine is only as complicated as the respect you give it," he said. "Flying isn't about power or money. It's about skill, patience, and trust." The rooftop grew quieter for a moment. Jennifer's eyebrows lifted slightly. She had never heard the janitor speak with such confidence. Michael blinked, then laughed louder than before. "Skill and patience. That's cute," he mocked. He gestured toward the helicopter, his voice rising with pride. "Tell you what. If you can fly that thing right now, I'll marry you myself." Gasps and chuckles spread among the guests. Some laughed at the absurdity of the challenge, while others watched in surprise at Michael's bold words. Jennifer's lips parted in shock, and she gave Michael a quick look, but he only smirked. Robert didn't smile, didn't frown. His eyes were calm, but something unreadable flickered behind them. He looked straight at Michael and spoke softly, almost like a warning. "Be careful with promises, Mr. Roberts. Sometimes secrets fly higher than pride." The laughter slowly faded, leaving behind a strange silence. The guests shifted uneasily, unsure how to react. Jennifer studied Robert closely, curiosity sparking in her mind. Who was this man who spoke with such quiet strength? Michael scoffed, brushing it off with another laugh. "Don't take it seriously, folks. He's just the janitor. Let's get back to real business." But even as he spoke, something about Robert's calm words lingered in the air, as if a hidden truth had been touched without warning. As the evening continued, laughter and music returned, but Jennifer couldn't stop glancing at Robert. She saw the way he moved with certainty, his eyes still carrying that quiet mystery. For the first time, she wondered if Michael's mockery had awakened something more, something none of them were prepared to face. And Robert? He simply returned to his work, carrying his tray and mop. But inside him, a storm of memories stirred, and a secret long kept in silence waited to rise into the open sky. The rooftop event ended, and the night sky of New York sparkled with countless lights. Guests slowly left, their conversations filled with admiration for Michael Roberts and his confident words. The helicopter gleamed under the rooftop lamps, but the memory of Robert's calm reply still lingered in many minds. Jennifer Collins walked back into the office with Michael by her side. She tried to laugh at something he said, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't stop replaying Robert's words, "Sometimes secrets fly higher than pride." It had been spoken with such certainty, not like a joke, but like a truth hidden in plain sight. Michael, on the other hand, brushed the incident off. "People like him always talk big," he said with a smirk. "The janitor probably watched a few documentaries and thinks he knows something about flying. He's just a cleaner, Jennifer. Don't waste your thoughts on him." Jennifer nodded politely, but inside she wasn't convinced. She had worked in marketing for years, reading people carefully, and she knew when someone was pretending. Robert hadn't been pretending. His calm voice, his steady eyes, those were not from someone speaking out of pride. They belonged to someone who had lived those words. Downstairs, Robert quietly returned his cleaning tools to the small storage room where he worked. The mop stood in the corner, buckets stacked neatly, and a simple wooden chair rested by the wall. He sat down for a moment, his hands folded together, his eyes staring at the floor. The laughter, the mockery, the promise Michael had thrown into the air, it had all awakened something he had tried to bury for years. Memories stirred within him, heavy and sharp. The smell of aviation fuel, the sound of rotor blades slicing through the air, the weight of a helmet against his head. He closed his eyes, and in that instant, Robert was no longer the janitor. He was somewhere else inside a roaring helicopter, the world spinning beneath him. He remembered missions, storms, and the voices of men who had once trusted him with their lives. He remembered honor, responsibility, and loss. But he pushed the memories aside. This was not the time to bring them back. He had chosen this quiet life for a reason. The next morning, as sunlight poured into the office building, whispers of last night's rooftop incident spread among the staff. Employees who had been there retold the story in the break room and in hushed tones by the elevators. "Did you hear what the CEO said to the janitor?" one asked. "Yeah, told him he'd marry him if he flew the helicopter." "Can you imagine?" another replied with a laugh. But the janitor didn't look scared. "He actually answered back," someone else added, lowering their voice. It was strange, like he knew what he was talking about. By noon, even those who hadn't been at the event had heard the story. Some laughed about it, some shook their heads, and a few, like Jennifer, felt an odd sense of curiosity. Later that day, Jennifer found herself walking past the storage room where Robert often worked. The door was half open, and inside she saw him fixing a broken vacuum cleaner with careful hands. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Robert," she said softly. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Miss Collins," he replied respectfully. She gave a small smile. "You spoke with confidence last night." "I keep thinking about it." Do you actually know anything about flying?" For a long moment, Robert was silent. His eyes dropped to the vacuum, his hands still working calmly. Finally, he answered, his voice quiet but firm. "Knowing and doing are two different things, Miss Collins. Some skills never leave you, even when the world thinks you've forgotten them." Jennifer studied him carefully. "Then it's true," she whispered. "You were more than a janitor before this." Robert did not confirm or deny it. Instead, he gave her a gentle look. "Sometimes it's better to let the past stay where it belongs." But Jennifer wasn't satisfied. She sensed a story hidden in his words, something that could change everything she thought she knew about him. Later that week, another company event was announced. Investors were returning, and once again, the helicopter would be displayed. This time, the whispers from last time grew louder. Employees joked that maybe the janitor would take the pilot's seat. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes, but everyone waited to see what might happen. Michael, of course, continued his life as though nothing had happened. He made deals, gave orders, and enjoyed the admiration that came with his position. Yet, when he passed Robert in the halls, a small flicker of irritation crossed his face. It wasn't that he truly believed Robert could fly, it was the fact that the man had dared to stand so calmly against his mockery. The day of the new event arrived. The rooftop once again filled with important guests. The helicopter stood waiting under the glow of the evening sky. And this time, as Robert quietly carried his tray of drinks across the rooftop, more than a few eyes followed him. The whispers returned, the laughter grew, and anticipation hung in the air. Jennifer, standing near Michael, glanced at Robert with curiosity and something else, respect. She had a feeling that the truth was about to rise, just like the machine that stood before them. The evening sky was calm, painted with streaks of pink and orange as the company prepared for another rooftop event. The helicopter sat proudly on the helipad once again, blades gleaming under the golden light. Guests in formal suits and shining dresses gathered around, their voices carrying across the rooftop like a rising tide. Music played faintly in the background, glasses clinked, and the air was filled with excitement. But this time, there was something different. A sense of expectation lingered among the people. Everyone remembered what had happened the week before. They remembered the CEO's bold mockery, the janitor's calm reply, and the strange words that had silenced the crowd. Employees whispered quietly as they gathered near the buffet. "Do you think Robert will say something again tonight?" "I doubt it. He's probably too smart to repeat that." "But what if he actually knows how to fly?" He sounded sure of himself. Jennifer Collins stood near the edge of the rooftop, her eyes on Robert. He was moving steadily through the crowd, carrying a tray of drinks with quiet dignity. His steps were neither hurried nor hesitant. He looked like a man who belonged, even if his uniform told another story. She thought about her conversation with him in the storage room. The way he had said, "Some skills never leave you." It echoed in her mind every time she saw him. She knew there was more to his story, and she wanted to uncover it. Michael Roberts, however, seemed eager to erase the memory of the last incident. He laughed loudly with his investors, shaking hands and speaking with authority. He wore pride like a crown, believing that nothing could touch his reputation. Still, when his eyes landed on Robert moving through the crowd, something flickered in his expression, an irritation he tried to hide behind a smile. He hadn't forgotten his own words. As the night deepened, the helicopter became the center of attention once again. Guests gathered near it, admiring its polished frame. Michael raised his glass, speaking confidently about his company's success and its future in aviation. His words drew nods of approval and polite claps from the audience. Then, just as the applause died down, one of the investors, an older gentleman named William Harris, pointed toward Robert. "Is that the man you challenged last week, Michael?" he asked with a chuckle. "The janitor you said should fly the helicopter." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and all eyes turned to Robert. He froze for a moment, standing with his tray in hand. His calm gaze swept across the faces staring at him, and finally, it rested on Michael. Michael smirked, though his jaw tightened slightly. He raised his voice for everyone to hear. "Well, yes, that's him. Robert the janitor. I told him last week if he can fly this helicopter, I'd marry him myself." The rooftop filled with laughter once again. Some guests shook their heads, others looked amused, but a few like Jennifer watched Robert closely. Robert set down his tray slowly on a nearby table. His movements were deliberate, controlled, like someone preparing for something serious. He stepped forward, his uniform looking out of place among the tailored suits and glittering dresses, but his presence commanded attention nonetheless. His voice, calm and steady, broke through the laughter. "You enjoy turning people into jokes, Mr. Roberts. But some promises are heavier than you think." The crowd grew quieter. The laughter faded into murmurs. Michael raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "What are you saying, Robert? You're going to take me up on that challenge?" Robert's eyes held steady. "You said if I could fly this helicopter, you'd marry me. I don't need your marriage, Mr. Roberts. But I won't allow you to make a mockery of skill. If you truly wish to see whether your words carry weight, give me the chance." Gasps filled the rooftop. The guests looked from Michael to Robert, unsure of what would happen next. Jennifer's heart beat faster as she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Robert. Michael laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "You? A janitor? You expect us to believe you can fly?" Robert didn't flinch. "Belief isn't necessary. Truth shows itself." The tension in the air thickened. Even the investors who had been laughing moments ago now seemed curious. A few whispered among themselves, wondering if the janitor was bluffing or if something extraordinary was hidden in him. Jennifer took a step closer, her voice calm but firm. "Michael, let him try. What harm could it do? If he fails, your point is proven. If he succeeds, well, perhaps we all learn something new." The crowd murmured in agreement. It was unusual for Jennifer to oppose Michael, and that made her words even more powerful. Michael looked at her, then at Robert, then at the helicopter. He didn't like being cornered, especially not in front of his guests. But he couldn't back down now without looking weak. Finally, he shrugged, his voice dripping with mock confidence. "Fine. Let's give the janitor his little show. Go ahead, Robert. Prove to us you're more than a mop and bucket. The guests stepped back, forming a wide circle around the helicopter. The blades gleamed under the rooftop lights, silent and waiting. Robert moved forward slowly, his step steady, his face calm. The city lights stretched out around him, and the helicopter stood before him like an old friend waiting to be touched. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: this was no ordinary janitor. The rooftop was silent. The city lights stretched endlessly, and the helicopter gleamed under the lamps like a challenge carved in steel. Everyone waited as Robert stepped closer, his uniform plain and unimportant compared to the polished suits around him. Yet in that moment, he carried a weight far greater than anyone else. Michael stood with his arms crossed, his smirk still on his face, though a flicker of unease hid in his eyes. Jennifer stood slightly apart, her gaze fixed on Robert, her heart racing with an anticipation she couldn't explain. The guests whispered, some mocking, some curious, but all drawn to what was about to unfold. Robert placed his hand gently on the helicopter's frame. The cool metal under his fingers stirred a rush of memories. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and in his mind, he wasn't on a rooftop anymore. He was back in a hangar, wearing a flight suit, his crew beside him. The smell of fuel, the sound of orders, the trust placed in his hands, all of it returned. Slowly, he opened the door of the helicopter. The crowd watched with bated breath. For them, it was just an ordinary janitor touching a machine he couldn't possibly know. But for Robert, it was like greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. He climbed inside, settling into the pilot's seat with a natural ease that caught Jennifer's eye. His hands moved carefully but confidently, touching the controls with a familiarity no janitor should have. "Don't tell me he actually knows what he's doing," whispered one of the investors. Michael laughed, though his voice sounded tight. "Relax. He's just pretending. Anyone can sit there and look serious." But Robert wasn't pretending. He adjusted switches, checked instruments, and his steady hands revealed a man who knew this world well. He moved with a rhythm that came only from training and experience. When the rotor blades began to turn slowly, the rooftop filled with gasps. The wind pushed against the guests, their clothes fluttering, their laughter fading into stunned silence. Jennifer covered her mouth, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Robert wasn't fumbling. He wasn't guessing. He was preparing for takeoff like a man who had done it 100 times before. The blades spun faster, their roar rising into the night sky. Robert's eyes were focused, his expression calm, as if the noise, the pressure, and the watching crowd didn't exist. With a controlled pull, the helicopter lifted from the ground. The rooftop shook with the force, and people staggered back, holding onto their drinks and bags as the machine rose higher. The janitor was flying. Gasps and shouts filled the air. Some clapped their hands over their mouths, others pointed in disbelief, and a few could only stare, frozen where they stood. Jennifer felt her heart pound harder with every second. The impossible had become reality before her eyes. The man they had all overlooked, the man mocked for carrying a mop, was soaring above them with skill and grace. Robert maneuvered the helicopter in a steady hover, circling above the rooftop with precision. His hands moved with confidence, guiding the machine as if it was an extension of himself. The city spread out beneath him, glowing with lights, and for the first time in years, he felt the rush of freedom that only the sky could bring. Down below, Michael's smirk had completely vanished. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and his jaw clenched as he tried to process what he was seeing. He couldn't laugh anymore, not when the truth was flying right above him. One of the investors turned to him with a sharp look. "Michael, you said if he could fly, you'd marry him. Looks like your janitor just proved you wrong." More murmurs and laughter spread through the crowd, but this time it was directed at Michael, not Robert. The powerful CEO, usually untouchable, suddenly looked small in front of everyone. Jennifer, however, couldn't take her eyes off Robert. There was more than skill in his flight. There was emotion, a quiet strength, and a story untold. She felt respect rise in her heart, stronger than she had expected. After a few graceful turns above the rooftop, Robert guided the helicopter back down. The machine landed smoothly, its blade slowing to a stop. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Robert stepped out, his uniform still plain, his shoes dusty, but his presence towering. He stood calmly before the crowd, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't need to prove anything," he said. "But sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness. I know where I come from, and I know what I can do. Titles don't define skill. Respect does." The guests erupted with claps and cheers, some even shouting words of admiration. Jennifer's eyes shone with wonder, while Michael's face burned with humiliation. But Robert didn't bask in their praise. He simply picked up his tray, placed it on the table, and walked back toward his corner of the rooftop. For him, the flight wasn't about showing off. It was about reminding himself and everyone else that no matter how much the world tried to bury the past, the sky never forgot those who once belonged to it. And as Jennifer watched him disappear into the crowd, she knew one thing for certain: Robert Miller was no ordinary janitor. He was a man with secrets that could change everything. The rooftop was alive with whispers even after Robert's flight ended. Guests who had once dismissed him now spoke his name with respect and amazement. The janitor who had been invisible was suddenly the most important man of the night. Some clapped him on the shoulder as he passed, while others simply stared, wondering how such a man had ended up pushing a mop instead of flying aircrafts. But Robert didn't linger in the spotlight. He placed the tray of drinks back on the service table and quietly returned to his corner, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To him, the sky was not a stage for applause, it was a memory, a piece of his soul he had hidden away. Michael Roberts, however, was restless. His pride had been wounded in front of investors, and his own challenge had turned into humiliation. He forced a laugh when people teased him about his promise, but the embarrassment in his eyes was clear. Later that night, as the event came to an end, Jennifer Collins found Robert in the quiet hallway near the storage room. He was putting away his cleaning supplies, his expression calm as always, though his hands trembled slightly, as if the flight had awakened emotions too heavy to contain. "Robert," Jennifer began softly. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You were incredible tonight," she said. "But I need to know, who are you really? You don't fly like someone who just learned from books. You fly like someone who has lived in the sky." Robert studied her for a long moment. His face carried the weight of a man who had run from the truth for too long. Finally, he sighed and leaned back against the wall. "I was a pilot once," he said quietly. "Not for companies, not for investors, for my country." Jennifer's eyes widened. "You were in the military?" Robert nodded slowly. "I served for years. I flew in storms, in danger, in missions most people will never hear about. My crew trusted me with their lives, and I carried that weight with honor. But one mission changed everything. We lost men that day, good men. The helicopter came back, but not everyone did. And though people told me it wasn't my fault, I carried the blame in my heart. His voice grew heavier as he spoke, but steady. When I left the service, I wanted a simple life. No more machines, no more skies. Just silence. That's how I ended up here, sweeping floors, fixing lights, cleaning hallways. It was easier than living with memories. Jennifer's heart ached at his words. She could see the truth in his eyes, the quiet grief, the unspoken guilt. It explained everything: his calmness, his steady hands, the sadness that lingered even when he smiled. "But why stay hidden?" she asked gently. "You have so much talent. You could be anywhere, flying, teaching, leading." Robert gave a faint smile. "Sometimes the world doesn't need to know what you carry inside. Sometimes it's enough to just keep living." Jennifer shook her head. "No, Robert. People like you don't belong in shadows. You have more to give than you realize." Before he could answer, Michael's voice echoed down the hall. He stepped into view, his sharp suit still flawless, but his pride cracked. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "So it's true," Michael said coldly. "You were a pilot. That explains the little performance tonight. Impressive, sure. But don't think for a second that it makes you equal to me. You're still the janitor. You still answer to people like me." Robert didn't react with anger. His calm gaze met Michael's. "I don't measure myself by titles, Mr. Roberts. And neither should you. Respect isn't earned by mocking others, it's earned by how you treat them." Jennifer looked sharply at Michael, her disappointment clear. "Michael, you made him a joke, and he proved he was more than you ever imagined. Instead of respecting him, you're still trying to put him down." Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The truth in Jennifer's words stung more than Robert's calm reply. As the days passed, the story of the janitor who flew spread beyond the office. Employees shared it with friends, and soon even clients heard whispers of it. Some investors returned with questions, curious about the mysterious man who had humbled the CEO on his own rooftop. Jennifer continued to seek Robert out. She wanted to learn more about his past, his experiences, and the man behind the uniform. Each time they spoke, she felt her respect for him grow deeper. He was not only skilled, he was wise, humble, and kind. But Robert remained cautious. He had built a wall around his heart for years, and letting someone see inside was not easy. Yet, when Jennifer looked at him with genuine admiration, he felt something stir within him, something he thought he had buried along with his flying days. One evening, as the office grew quiet and the city lights flickered outside, Jennifer found Robert repairing a broken chair in the lounge. She sat across from him, her voice soft. "Robert, you can't hide forever. You were born to do more than this. Maybe it's time to face the sky again." Robert paused, the tools in his hand still. He looked at her, his eyes carrying both pain and hope. "The sky remembers everything, Jennifer. And I don't know if I'm ready to remember it all." Jennifer reached out, her hand brushing his arm gently. "Then don't face it alone." For the first time in years, Robert didn't turn away from the idea. For the first time, he considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world still needed him and that someone believed in him enough to help him rise again. Days after the rooftop event, the office carried a different energy. People no longer looked at Robert as just a janitor. They whispered about his skills, about the way he had handled the helicopter with calmness and strength. Some greeted him with new respect, though he remained humble, still carrying out his daily tasks as though nothing had changed. but inside, something had shifted. Robert felt the weight of memories pressing against the walls he had built. Every time he held a broom or pushed a cart, he thought of the controls of a helicopter, the vibration of engines, the rush of wind. The sky was calling him again, even though he feared it. Jennifer noticed the change. She often found him standing by the windows, staring at the horizon as if searching for something far away. She approached him one afternoon while he was polishing the glass doors. "You miss it, don't you?" she asked softly. Robert smiled faintly but didn't deny it. "Once you've lived in the sky, the ground feels heavier. But missing it doesn't mean I'm ready to go back." Jennifer shook her head gently. "Maybe it doesn't mean going back the same way. Maybe it means finding a new way to use your gift. The world doesn't erase what you know, it just waits for you to share it again." Her words stayed with him. That night, he lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. He thought of his old teammates, of missions completed and missions lost. He thought of the silence after the war, the loneliness that had driven him to hide. And he thought of Jennifer's eyes bright with belief, urging him to rise again. Meanwhile, Michael was struggling. The investors had not forgotten the rooftop challenge. Some questioned his arrogance, others laughed behind his back. His reputation had been shaken, and the more he tried to ignore it, the worse it became. Each time he saw Robert walking through the building, calm and respected, Michael's frustration grew. One morning, Jennifer was called to Michael's office. He leaned against his desk, his expression cold. "You've been spending a lot of time with the janitor," he said sharply. Jennifer met his eyes without fear. "His name is Robert. And yes, I've been talking to him. He has wisdom you could learn from, Michael." Michael's jaw tightened. "Wisdom? He's a man hiding behind a mop. Don't let his little show fool you. People like him don't belong in our world." Jennifer's voice grew firm. "Respect doesn't belong to titles, Michael. It belongs to character. And Robert has more of it than anyone I've met." For a moment, Michael said nothing, but his anger burned. He felt as though Robert had stolen the attention that once belonged to him. Later that week, the company prepared for another gathering, this time, a charity event to support families of fallen servicemen. It was meant to honor those who had sacrificed, yet the irony wasn't lost on Robert. He avoided the event until Jennifer found him in the storage room again. "You should be there," she told him. "This event is for people like you." Robert shook his head. "It's not about me. It's about the ones who never came home." Jennifer's voice softened. "And who will speak for them if you stay silent? You don't have to hide anymore, Robert. Maybe tonight isn't about flying, it's about standing." Her words touched something deep inside him. That evening, dressed not in his janitor's uniform but in a simple suit Jennifer had helped him find, Robert attended the charity event. The room fell quiet when he entered. Some guests recognized him instantly as the man from the rooftop. Murmurs filled the air, but Robert ignored them. He walked with calm steps, carrying himself with quiet dignity. During the speeches, an organizer noticed him and asked if he would like to say a few words. At first, Robert hesitated. Speaking in front of a crowd was harder than flying into a storm. But then he remembered Jennifer's words, "Don't hide." He stepped to the stage. His voice was low but steady. "I was once a pilot," he began. "I flew missions that tested every part of me. I lost friends, brothers, and I carried their memory with me every day. When I left, I thought I could bury the past. But the truth is, you can't bury honor, and you can't bury the love you have for those who served beside you. The room was silent. Not a glass clinked, not a whisper broke the air. I became a janitor because I wanted to live a quiet life. But tonight I stand here not as a man with a mop, not even as a pilot, but as someone who believes that every person, no matter their uniform, no matter their role, has value. We don't need titles to respect one another. We only need humanity. When he stepped down, the applause was not loud at first. It was deep, respectful, and lasting. People rose to their feet, not because of his rank, but because of his truth. Jennifer's eyes glistened with pride. She whispered as he returned to his seat, "You're rising again, Robert. And you don't even know it." Robert smiled faintly, the first true smile in years. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man running from the sky. He felt like a man walking toward it again, with courage, with dignity, and perhaps, with a companion by his side who believed in him more than he believed in himself. The morning after the charity event, the office felt different. Robert walked through the halls with a quiet confidence that drew eyes wherever he went. People nodded at him with respect, some even smiling for the first time in recognition. He no longer felt invisible. Jennifer met him near the elevators, her eyes bright with admiration. "You were incredible last night," she said softly. "You didn't just speak, you reminded everyone why respect matters." Robert nodded, a small smile on his lips. "It wasn't about me," he said. "It was about standing for what's right, even when you've hidden for too long." Jennifer reached out, her hand brushing his arm. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not from the world, and not from yourself." Meanwhile, Michael Roberts paced in his office, frustration etched into every line of his face. He had watched Robert rise in respect while his own pride had crumbled. His mockery, once confident and cutting, had become a mistake he couldn't undo. Determined to reclaim some control, Michael called a meeting with his board. He spoke with sharp words, attempting to downplay Robert's rising influence. "He's talented, yes," Michael said, "but he's still a janitor. Titles matter, and this story has been blown out of proportion." The board listened politely, but their faces betrayed doubt. Michael's words sounded hollow. Everyone had witnessed Robert's skill, his courage, and his integrity. The rooftop flight, the charity speech, these were not moments easily forgotten. By mid-afternoon, Jennifer approached Robert again. She had an idea, a way for him to embrace his skills without hiding. "Robert," she said, "there's a project starting soon. The company needs someone with your experience to train new pilots and oversee aviation safety. I think you'd be perfect." Robert paused. The thought of stepping fully back into the aviation world both excited and frightened him. But then he looked at Jennifer's sincere eyes and felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Maybe it's time," he said quietly. "Maybe the sky is ready for me again." Michael, hearing about the proposal, felt a surge of disbelief. He stormed into Jennifer's office. "You're suggesting we put a janitor in a position of authority over pilots? Are you serious?" Jennifer stood firm. "I'm serious. Robert has experience, skill, and respect that no one else here has earned. It's not about titles, Michael, it's about capability." Michael's face burned with anger, but he knew arguing further would only worsen his reputation. He left without another word, his pride wounded more deeply than he expected. The next week, Robert officially took on his new role. The office watched as he guided trainees, inspected helicopters, and shared his knowledge with calm authority. He was no longer invisible. He was a leader, not by title alone, but because of what he represented: courage, skill, and integrity. Jennifer often stayed by his side, helping him navigate the corporate world he had long avoided. Their friendship grew stronger, built on trust and admiration. And for the first time in years, Robert felt hope not just for himself, but for the people he could now help. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Jennifer and Robert stood on the rooftop. The same helicopter that had once symbolized mockery now stood quietly, a reminder of how far he had come. "You've changed everything, Robert," Jennifer said. "You've shown people that respect isn't about titles or money. It's about character." Robert looked out over the city, the wind brushing his face. "I only hope that others will remember it, too. That they'll know even those who seem small can rise to great heights." Jennifer smiled. "And maybe, just maybe, someone like me will remember it forever." Robert turned to her, his smile gentle and real. "Then I suppose it's time to stop hiding completely." From that day on, Robert didn't just work as a janitor, and he didn't just fly helicopters. He became a symbol, proof that courage, skill, and integrity could rise above mockery, doubt, and fear. Michael, meanwhile, had no choice but to accept it. He could not erase the truth that Robert had revealed, not just to the company, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. Respect could not be faked, and Robert had earned it in ways that no title or wealth could ever buy. As Robert stood on the rooftop, the city lights shimmering below, he felt the wind on his face once more. The sky was no longer a memory of loss, it was a promise of freedom, of potential, and of a life he had reclaimed. Jennifer joined him, her hand brushing against his. Together, they looked out over the horizon, knowing that the impossible had been proven possible and that true courage could never be hidden. The helicopter rested silently nearby, a reminder of the day when a janitor defied mockery, reclaimed his past, and soared above it all, leaving everyone, especially Michael, speechless. Robert had finally risen to his true place. Not because someone had granted it, but because he had earned it. And this time, no one would ever forget him.